All right, welcome back. We're going to start our material, Chapter 1, which is Introduction to Information Security. All right, so let's start off by talking about the triad. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the lower third now. You know what class this is by now. Okay, so we're going to talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which are the key cornerstones of information security. So the first one, confidentiality, we want to make sure that we provide for mechanisms that ensure that data is kept confidential and only available to those who need to know about it. Integrity, we want to make sure that the data hasn't been altered. And availability, we want to make sure that the data is available to those who should have a legitimate access to it and unavailable to those who do not need to have access. So with confidentiality, we're really limiting who can have access to information. And we can do this in a variety of different ways. First of all, we have to have security policies. And I know that security policies suck sometimes, okay? But they're a necessary evil in order to keep our data safe. Another thing is training and education. And this is an area that we'll talk about later called SETA, Security, Education, Training, and Awareness. Okay? So we need to make sure people are trained and educated on how to maintain that confidentiality. Okay? The third area is encryption, and we're going to be talking about this here very soon in our next live session. In fact, we're actually going to do some exercises with encryption, and one of your homework assignments utilizes encryption. Okay? Encryption being a way to protect the data so that others can't read it. And the example I like to use is, if we were in the classroom, we'd be able to do this. Can't really do it, but you could do it with someone in your own home, I suppose, is you can write a message. Okay? And if you write a message and you pass it to someone else, even if it's in an envelope, it could be opened, intercepted, and read. Okay? But if you use some sort of code to write that message, the other person would either have to have the code or have enough time to determine what the code meant. Okay, so that's the equivalent of encryption if you were to pass a note back and forth. And we're going to use a very simple level of code for one of our homework assignments to do something fun. The fourth area being secure storage. So we want to make sure that the storage itself is secure. So prime example of unsecure would be if I had a USB drive and I passed it back and forth between computers. I potentially left it sitting in my machine. I left it, in my backpack in my car, that sort of thing. Not very secure. Okay? Likewise, if I were to have storage in a data center or in a cloud environment and I didn't lock it down, that wouldn't be good either. So we want to make sure we have secure storage. The last area is classification. So I'm sure you're all familiar with spy movies and stuff where there's secret and top secret and things like that. We have different data classifications in business as well. So we might have public or internal use only or highly confidential, that sort of thing. We need to make sure we classify the data. Some data, it's okay if it becomes public because it's considered public information that people might have through some other means anyways. Other things would be just kill our business if they were to get out. Okay, trade secrets and things like that. So classification is very important as well. Then there's integrity. So moving to integrity, we want to protect against damage. So we want to make sure that someone can't come in and damage our data. We want to make sure that people can't go in and destroy our data. And we want to make sure that we protect against corruption. Okay? And so from a destruction, the damage is pretty straightforward. Destruction, a prime example was I worked for a company a long time ago, and I was brought in as part of a red team. And I was brought in as part of a red team because their entire IT staff decided to walk. Okay, they all quit on the same day. But before they quit, they decided that they would go and destroy company data. And so on their way through the server room, which oddly enough was the only way to get out of their office area, they went in and they changed passwords on systems so that people were locked out. They went in and pulled backup tapes and pulled the tape out of the cartridges and crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. They took hard drives with them. They took hard drives and smashed them with hammers and things like that. Okay, so they destroyed the data. And then the last area, by the way, they went to, I think they went to jail. Okay, they certainly were prosecuted. The corruption. Okay, this can actually happen, and we've had this happen before with our own computers probably, where the data gets corrupted, okay, on your hard disk or your SSD drive. Okay, so to protect the integrity against these areas, we can do things like backups. Okay, so we might do a backup of our data, synchronization of files, that sort of thing. And then availability, which is the third triad. And so we've got authorized users. We want to make sure that authorized users have access. And so how do we do that? We do role-based authentication. And we utilize principles authorization and authentication. Okay, so those are named auth-z and auth-n as nicknames, okay, in case you're curious. So at Cal State, we just recently implemented Duo to do two-factor authentication, and that's to make sure that only authorized people are accessing systems. Okay? Because passwords alone are not sufficient to protect your data anymore. Right? Now, the other thing is, within authorized users, we can have some other mechanisms in place. And we will talk about mechanisms a little later. I'll just kind of whet your appetite here. So we can do things like a firewall. Okay? We can do things like intrusion protection systems. I'm sure all of you, if you live at home or in an apartment or something, you have a router, okay? And so I don't know how well you can see up there, but over there I have a router that is also a firewall and also an intrusion protection system, okay? And so that system allows me to filter traffic on my network, and if it's coming from bad places or it's coming from known malicious people, I can block it. It can also determine what type of traffic it is, and not just tell me about it, it also protects against it. And a prime example is my daughter. She is the only person with a Windows machine in my home. Okay? And she is on a special network that is isolated from the rest of the house. That intrusion protection system was able to tell me in real time that she had gone to a website that was trying to phone home, but it wouldn't let it. So that leads me to another form of protection, and that's something called Pi-hole. Okay? It's like an ad blocker type service. And so Pi-hole, some of you are MIS majors, some of you are not. So if you are interested in this sort of stuff, you can actually build your own Pi-hole on your own machine. Okay? Pi-hole can run in a Docker container. It can run on a machine natively. It can run in a virtual machine. And it can also run on a Raspberry Pi, which is a very cheap computer. 15, 20 bucks, and you can run it on that as well. Okay. Raspberry Pi, I've got one around here someplace. Oh, it's right here. Okay. That's not it. Thought that was it. Looked just like it. I don't know. Oh, here it is. So this is a Raspberry Pi inside a little tiny case, a little tiny computer. You could run Pi-hole on this as well. All right. The idea behind this is it allows us to protect our network, and so everything for my daughter is actually going through that Pi-hole now. So on top of being able to detect intrusions, we can block her computer from phoning home and doing things. And it's very interesting to see what these computers do in terms of phoning home. Okay? Every time she plays Minecraft, you can see everything it's doing. So taking precautions like that. Access in a usable format. So we want to make sure that we provide access to the data in a format that's usable. So a lot of times, we will provide a database or something for the data that we can then export to a variety of formats. And then that availability gives a person access to the information that's underlying the system. Okay. Okay. Privacy. Information is only collected, used, and stored for permitted purposes, and it's disclosed when collected. This is not only a good business practice, it's also a legal requirement, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on in the course, but there are some new laws in the U.S. So I would wager that it's a long time before we ever see anything at a federal level. The federal government, there are too many differing opinions, and unfortunately, there are a lot of lobbyists who advocate for their needs and the business owner needs to the detriment of the general populace. Okay? So I don't think we'll ever see federal privacy law unless something significant happens. But we do have state level laws, and California has the strongest laws in the U.S. now. So we have the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which took effect a year ago. All right. We also have a new privacy law, and I forget the acronym, but it's a new privacy law that we voted for back in November. I'm not sure when it takes effect, but between those two, it is going to be a significant change in the way that privacy is dealt with within California and any business that does business with people from California. Okay, so I guess in a way you could say that California is leading the way in that regard, and it will impact the rest of the country, even though the feds haven't done anything about it. All right. Outside of the U.S., in other countries, in particular European countries, if they're a member of the European Union, they have the strictest privacy laws in the world. And if you do business with those countries, you would better understand the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation for the European Union. Okay? If not, you could face significant fines. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. Okay? Privacy in the context of information security is not freedom from observation. Very important. Okay? We're talking about the data itself, and when we talk about privacy in the context of data, we're talking about the collection, use, and storage of that information. Okay? We're not talking about people being able to spy on you. Okay? All right, so what kind of protection mechanisms can we have from a security perspective? Well, we can first of all write policies, okay? Documents that spell out how we're going to handle certain things. But a policy can only go so far. If no one understands the policy, then what good is it? So that's where training and awareness, or SETA, comes in. Okay? Security education, training, and awareness. So we use training and awareness, or SETA, to make sure our users are familiar with the policy and how they should behave. And then the third mechanism is technology. So I mentioned over there I've got a router IPS system, firewall. Okay? And I will show you some demonstrations in the class of firewalls and things like that, which all of you can set up if you wanted to. All right, but technology has a lot of mechanisms we can use. So those three things combined are what give us information security, okay, and strong information security. If we're lacking in any of those areas, the house comes crumbling down. Okay? And actually, there was a recent example, won't name the companies involved, you can look at the news and see all about it, but there was a state actor that's responsible for hacking into some systems, and how they hacked in is quite interesting. They did what's called a supply chain attack. Okay? So they basically figured out how to get into an organization's supply chain and alter some software that was used to build their software, and then incidentally a bunch of other customers used that software and of course had that software on their system. So the attack was very broad in scope. They didn't go after the system hosting the data. They went after the underlying system that was used to build software. Okay. All right, so let's look at the intersection of some of these information security concepts. So at the foundation, we have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay. Then we have three pillars. We have our network security, our data security, and our computer security. We will talk about all of these in this class. So when we talk about zero trust, we're going to talk about the network and computer security. When we talk about data security, we're going to talk about that aspect. Okay, and then policy overlays on top of all of them. Now, the next thing that we have in the book to talk about is McCumber cubes. So you can see these cubes have things like the technology, the education, the policy, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and then we have the storage, processing, and transmission, which correlate to these three pillars, by the way: network, data, and computer security. Now, let's move on to access control. So access control is where we identify, authenticate, authorize, and then hold the user accountable. Okay, so every time you do anything, once you log in with your Duo account and your credentials, you have been identified, you have authenticated, and then there's a list of permissions that you have. That's your authorization. So if you're trying to access a system that you do not have access to, at that point it should tell you no, you can't have access. And it will also log that. That's the accountability. It logs it, so there's a record for IT or security to go back and look. Okay, so we don't have to worry about this in this class because we aren't doing any tests, but I have had students who have said to me in the past, "But professor, I took the exam, you got to believe me, Cougar Courses had a problem." Okay, well, there are other systems besides Cougar Courses. First of all, yes, I can see you identified. Okay, so you were able to put in your credentials. You were authenticated. You were authorized. Okay? But accountability, we were able to see that you never actually clicked on the quiz until after it was due. Okay? So all these things come in and play a hand in access control. All right? So then identification, let's talk about that first. So we've got to recognize individual users. It's usually a username, but it could be some other form of ID. If any of you are military or ex-military, it would be your CAC card. Okay? If you're badging into your employer, it could be your ID badge. Okay, that sort of thing. Authentication, there are different methods of authentication. So we have validation needs to occur. We do verification. So validation, for example, would be, are you entering an actual password or are you entering SQL code? Okay. If we want to prevent against certain types of attacks, we want to validate the input of the user. Okay. So if our password system only allows letters and numbers, then if the password the person types in has special characters, we would validate and say, hell no, that's not going to work. Okay. Same thing when we're setting the password, we do validation and make sure it contains valid characters. Some companies do this better than others. Then we verify. We actually say, okay, is that the correct password? Okay, great. The methods we can use for authentication can vary. We can use passwords, that's the most common. Sometimes we use pins, okay? And sometimes we use passphrases which are significantly longer than a password, like a sentence or something like that. Okay? We can also use multiple factors of authentication. Okay? So actually, before I say multiple factors, let me add a few more things. So there's a few more methods. We can use biometrics. Okay? We could use a card coupled with a pin. And then two-factor auth is where we have multiple authentication methods. So yes, you enter your password and then it prompts you to do the dual security sort of thing. Okay. And an example of this outside of the computer realm is access to a physical facility. So I've worked in facilities before where you first go to a guard station at the gate and you show your ID badge. Okay. And then you scan it. And the security guard opens the gate for you. And then you go inside. And then you park your car. Then there's another gate that you walk up to, you swipe your badge, and it lets you through a fence into the perimeter of the building. Then you walk up to the building, you scan your badge again, and you enter your code. That lets you in the front door. Now you're greeted by a guard who looks at your driver's license and looks at has you scan your badge. Okay? And they verify that the picture matches. Then you go ahead and scan your badge and enter your PIN code again. That gets you into what's called, sorry for the name, man trap. Okay, we can call it person trap though. Okay, and in the person trap, it's a room with a door on each end. Possibly more than that, but let's just say a door on each end. And once you go in, no one else is allowed in there while you're in there. Okay, so you go in, and now you can't get back out unless the security guard lets you out, or you authenticate to go back out either door. Okay, and so on one end, it's just the end that you came in is just entering your badge and your PIN code. Good, that's easy, right? But to go in the more secure door, you actually have to do other things. So I've worked in buildings where you first scan your badge, then it asks for your code, then it has you put your hand down on a handprint scanner, scans your handprint. If you pass that, then it has you do a retina scan. Okay? And then once you do the retina scan, it lets you into the next room. It unlocks the door and lets you in. Okay? If you attempt to basically not use something that works, like you're not the person who has that, somehow you forget the code for the badge, you got the badge, you go and scan your hand, but you're just holding the dead person's hand, okay? And then it tries to do the retina scan. It's going to start flashing lights, siren, and you're going to be locked down in that room until the security can arrive, okay? So that's an example of taking authentication a bit further. You can even go further than that. There are, if you're interested, there's something called FIPS 140-3. It's from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. At different levels, the authentication system is supposed to self-destruct. And by self-destruct, I mean, if you're like a FIPS 140-3 level 4, I believe it is, then there should be explosives, and after you incorrectly enter your password or other authentication mechanism 4 times or whatever it is, the thing actually blows it up. Okay, that's the level that government agencies tend to use, is being able to, they have to be FIPS compliant at different levels. I'm not saying that they're all that way, but businesses have started going down that path as well, of being FIPS compliant. Right, authorization. So this is where you define your access level and permissions. This is usually role-based. Okay, so if you are the CEO, you obviously have a different level of authorization than the normal employee does. Okay, and so we assign permissions ahead of time for different roles, maybe individuals, but most of the time it's roles, and then we assign individuals to roles. Okay. And that makes it a lot easier to manage the permissions, and it's something that public companies are required to comply with. Then accountability. We have auditing, as I mentioned. Okay. We log everything that happens, so we have a log that we can go back to and look. And then we track all activities. So we leverage business intelligence software like Splunk to be able to parse and search those logs and correlate events. Okay. So event correlation is very critical. Now let's talk about threats, which are potential risks. Okay. So with threat events, we have an attack, and this is where we damage or compromise a system. Okay. We can have an exploit, which is where we illegally use info systems for gain, and we can have a vulnerability, which is a potential weakness. Okay. There are categories of threats in the book. You should take a look at Table 1.1. Right? Now, let's talk about intellectual property, or IP. We have trade secrets, which are things we want to keep secret. We have to keep secret. So KFC's 11 herbs and spices, the Coca-Cola formula, etc. There can also be trade secrets in the tech world. Okay? Patents. These are things that they're the opposite of a trade secret. So there's something that you want to protect, but instead of keeping it secret, you publish it. Okay? And you get the government to issue a patent, which gives you a monopoly on that technology or that invention for a period of time. Okay? And then trademarks are things like the McDonald's logo, the Nike logo, that sort of thing. Okay? They're your property and you want to protect it, but it's more of a creative aspect. Okay? And then lastly, copyright. So software could fit into this category: movies, music, pictures, course materials, etc. That's an intellectual property. Someone created it using their brain, presumably. And that copyright protects them from other people utilizing it. Okay. Now, copyright holders can license their property, okay, but it's still their property and you can't copy it. So you are not, for example, I mentioned last week's introduction, you cannot copy my slides, my videos, etc. You can't post them anywhere. If you did so, that's a violation of copyright. Okay. Let me use one more example that probably hits home for at least some of you. Downloading music from a friend or a movie from a friend, sharing files like that is illegal, it's unethical, and it's a violation of copyright law. Okay? You do that sort of thing, you will get caught eventually, kind of like that movie Taken. You know, they will find you and they will make you pay. All right. Now, IP risk, you can have trade secret leakage, so someone can get the formula and leak it. You can have software piracy, so people steal your software. You can have media piracy, okay? Someone stealing your movies, your videos, your audio, whatever. And you can have copyright violations. Okay? So when we talk about risk management, there are IP risks. All right, so IS service interruptions and risks. There can be software interruptions or risks. Let's see if I can make this a little easier to read here. That's not what I want to do. Text. There we go. Better. Better than nothing, I guess. All right, so we can have software risks. So we could have failures in our software. We could have a version, have a bug, whatever that might be, can cause an interruption. We can have environmental risks. Okay, we can have an earthquake, a wildfire, a flood, a tornado, that sort of thing. Okay. We can have personnel risk. We can have dishonest employees who steal things. We can have employees who get paid off to, maliciously destroy evidence or something or information. Okay. We can lose our communications and power. A backhoe could dig up our T1 line and knock it out. Could dig up our power line, knock it out. Extortion. Okay. Ransomware is a great example of this. You get ransomware in a computer, you're locked out until you pay the fine. Okay? And if you don't have a good backup strategy, they could have backed up and actually destroyed your backups as well. There can be accidents. Okay? A great example of an accident was we had a computer, a very important computer for a business I worked at, and we needed to move it out of one facility and ship it to another. Well, the company was too cheap to pay for a real freight handler. Okay? This computer is probably about 250, 300 pounds. It should have been packed in a crate. Instead, the company decided to take it to the UPS store, the local office, package it up in a cardboard box, and send it UPS. When that computer arrived in San Diego, it didn't look like a computer anymore. UPS had dropped the box. The box had been completely destroyed. The computer was all mangled up, looked like it had been dropped off a 10-story building a couple of times, and was completely unusable. And so we lost everything on that computer. Okay? Yes, we were able to get insurance to pay for a replacement of the computer, but we lost everything that was on the computer, which was the point of shipping it to ourselves. Okay? Hardware, there can be hardware failures, and then lastly, there can be theft here. Okay? There's actually one more that's not in here. It kind of fits into personal, I suppose. And this happens a lot around San Diego, apparently. I talked to some folks who work for one of the defense contractors. And there are people who will throw USB drives over the fence at one of the facilities in San Diego in the hopes that people will pick it up and plug it into their work computer, thus infecting the network. Okay? And so that's a real risk that you have. If that comes in, you could actually unknowingly infect your entire network. So think twice. If I find a USB disk on the floor, I just give it to the lost and found. Like, I didn't even look at it. And I tell them, like, don't plug this thing in. Just don't do it. It's a risk. Software. So we can have issues with software, like malware, okay, which is why I grade in an isolated virtual machine. Denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks. I actually didn't talk about these yet, so we will right now, just briefly, and then I'll talk about them a bit more later. So denial of service attack is where we say, authorized users, I'm going to make sure you can't touch the system. Okay, so I go and connect 2 million times from my one computer to Cougar courses to try to cause a denial of service to all of you. Okay, that's an example of a denial of service. A distributed denial of service attack is very similar, except that it's coordinated by many people on the internet. Whereas a denial of service attack is relatively easy for an organization to block. They just block the IP address until another IP address comes online. A distributed denial of service attack is coming from many IP addresses simultaneously. So it's very difficult to stop that type of attack. So for DOS, we can mitigate with our firewall. We can block an IP address. And I did that. Someone told me about an IP that was hammering them. I went into my firewall the other night and added a rule to block it. Okay. A distributed denial of service attack, however, is so many people that you're not going to be able to do that. So with a distributed denial of service attack, you actually have to contract with a third party who offers a mitigation service. Very expensive. Okay. By expensive, I mean starts in the $500,000 range. Okay. Email. Spam, we all get it, okay? That can be a risk. Social engineering. Hey, Johnny, this is such and such from the CEO's office, and, she's at a conference, and I desperately need this investor relations slide. If you don't get it to me by the, next 10 minutes, I'm going to have her fire you, usually some sort of threat to scare you, and you say, oh shit, I need my job, it's a pandemic. Let me send that to you. Okay, you've been socially engineered. And then phishing is where we get emails that pretend to be from our bank or whatever they might be from, pretend to be from Dean Hammerly, and they're asking us for information. Okay. Interception, man in the middle, traffic sniffers. I'm going to show you a demonstration of that later on. Okay, in one of our recorded videos. Traffic sniffers are very interesting. Okay, because anybody can run them, right? I have one for when I'm troubleshooting problems on my network, but they go to show that if you don't take precautions, people can intercept what you do on your network. Going back to that envelope example, okay, if you don't encrypt the data, you have it in an envelope, fine and dandy, but what happens is you're going to hand it to Johnny and Jane grabs the envelope out of your hand, okay, and opens it up, that sort of thing. And then there can be bugs, either intentional or unintentional bugs in software. You should definitely look at the OWASP top 10 risks. This is updated periodically. Okay. Software security that's weak. So in networking and cryptography, these can be weak points in software. Okay. Environmental disasters, so natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, tsunamis, that sort of thing. Civil unrest and war going on right now, unfortunately. Okay. Never thought I'd see the day that we'd have this crap happening here. But unfortunately we do. So civil unrest can be an environmental risk. And I guarantee you companies are starting to think about this just like the government is. Every single one of those computers in the Capitol building should be considered compromised from a security perspective. Every single one. Okay, there's nothing to stop those individuals from dropping malware on them or stealing them, okay, or stealing the data or dropping data on there that is fake data. Okay, so that's an environmental risk. These are difficult to mitigate. The typical ways of mitigating environmental disasters are contingency planning, so having a business continuity plan, and purchasing insurance. Okay? Now, the federal government doesn't purchase insurance. So the federal government, when something like this happens, is on the hook to replace it, which means you and I are on the hook. Okay? Personnel. You can have internal espionage. You can also have hackers. Okay? Either the hackers get in directly or they get into some other point, like your employee's computer or something. Okay? Communications at power and communication outages. These happen more frequently than you think. Power is mitigated in core facilities like data centers with battery backups and generator power, okay? As well as usually two independent supplies of power from the utility. Okay? Communication outages can be a bit more difficult. I once worked in a facility in the DC area where they were proud of the fact that they had multiple power lines and they had a substation right outside, so there was no, they were not going to lose power unless there was a tornado or something. But communication-wise, they were proud of the fact that they had dual optical connections coming into the building. Okay. What they didn't know was that AT&T dropped both of the fiber lines on the same section of street from the same direction. And when they were building a new office building, one of the backhoes accidentally cut the fiber line and knocked out both of them because they were on the same side of the street. Okay. That could have been mitigated by running one of the fiber lines the opposite of the street out to the freeway. Okay. They didn't do that. So communication outages actually happen quite frequently. Extortion, ransomware being the most common. Okay. So you give me $1,000 or I'm going to delete your data. And you have 15 minutes to send it to me in Bitcoin. That sort of thing. Okay. Accidents, so human error, this is a big one. Not following instructions, insufficient training, and inexperience. I'm going to give you a story here about a situation that happened. I didn't cause it, just to be clear. I'll tell you two stories, actually. One, it did involve me making an error. The first was we had a server back when I worked for a big tech company a long time ago. It was like my second job. Okay? And we had a computer that had a failed hard drive. Okay? And we called the vendor. The vendor isn't in business anymore. It was basically a company called ALR, which was owned by Gateway at one point. I don't even think Gateway's around anymore. But anyways, this guy shows up to replace the hard disk. And he goes up to the computer, and I wasn't paying attention. It's not my job to make sure he knows what he's doing. Okay? He pulls the hard disk and he replaces it. Immediately, the phone in my office just starts ringing off the hook. What the heck just happened? What's going on? Well, I don't know. Let me check. Go over there and ask the guy, what did you do? Did you trip on a power cable or something? They said the whole network went down. And he said, no, I just pulled the hard drive. And I looked at the computer and I said, which one did you pull? And he goes, the one on the right. And I said, the one on the left was the broken one. It had a red light. Well, he had no idea. Okay. And we spent like 2 days recovering, and in the meantime, the entire company's network was down. They actually sent everybody home because they couldn't do any work. Okay. That highlighted a lot of other issues, but that particular issue, I asked the guy, I said, how could you do such a thing? He goes, look, man, this is my first day on the job. I said, did you not have any training? He goes, no. He goes, I just started this job. I said, what did you do before? And he said, I was a mechanic. I fixed cars. And I said, but they didn't give you any training? He goes, no. They said it was just like fixing a car. He had no training, he had no experience, and he had no instructions to follow. They literally just told him, pull the bad hard drive and replace it. He had no idea what he was doing. Okay? So that's one example of human error. Now, the example that actually involved me was early in my career, and this goes back to, making sure you know what you're doing. Okay? Early in my career, I was responsible for running an email system. Okay? And this email system was at the same company, actually. And I had a coworker who was the expert on the system. I knew a little bit about it, but not enough. Okay? I wanted to appear like I knew more than I actually did, so I didn't want to ask for help. My buddy went on vacation, and he was gone. And I didn't want to ask him for help because I know this stuff. I can figure it out. And one of the executives scared me. He had a fancy director title. He comes up to me and says, Thomas, there's an investigation. I need you to restore this person's mailbox. What I didn't know was if you restored a mailbox, it actually restored the whole server, everybody's mailbox. But I didn't know that. Okay. So I hit restore, and you weren't supposed to do it when it was running. I did it, and I didn't know I wasn't supposed to. It started restoring the entire mailbox store database over the existing one while it was running, and it corrupted it. And it knocked out email for the whole company worldwide. Okay, probably should have been fired for it, but I wasn't, because I fessed up immediately and just said, "Oh, sorry, I made an error." Right. The entire mail system went down. I had to call my buddy back from his vacation. It was down for 2 weeks. Now, fortunately, the company planned to be shut down for 2 weeks anyway, so it literally hit on the last day everybody was working. Okay, but that's an example of a human error accident, both of those. Okay? Now, there can also be social engineering and phishing attacks. Okay, so the example I like to give of social engineering was I worked for a company, and the CEO was going on vacation and told everybody that they were going on vacation. And went to a conference and told the conference people that they were going out on vacation. Okay, so guess what happens? Someone decided to social engineer and call our help desk person and say, "Hey, this is the CEO, and I need the source code and the financials for this vendor presentation, or the not vendor, sorry, investor presentation, and I need it now. And if you don't get it to me, I'm going to fire you." They knew the person's name. They knew everything about them. This person was scared out of their mind that they were going to get fired. So what did they do? They almost gave that information. Right before they hit send, they thought they should ask their manager. Okay, and their manager said, "No, no, 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 no. That's a social engineering attack." Okay. And then phishing, that's a fairly straightforward attack that we've seen before, where we get an email that claims to be from our bank. Hardware failures, okay? Hardware fails, okay? The mean time between failure is basically the average time between failures of that particular component. So physical hard disks have a lot of failures because of the spinning parts. SSDs tend to fail little pieces at a time, not the entire SSD drive. Okay? Mean time to failure. So how long on average does it take for failure? And then mean time to diagnose. So the first two here, MTBF and MTTF, these are things that generally when we buy a piece of hardware, it states what the testing has found for these two values. Enterprise class equipment will have higher numbers here. Okay, higher tolerances. And then mean time to diagnose failures is how long on average will it take us to diagnose and potentially resolve a failure. Okay. Now, obsolete systems can be a problem as well. So we can have obsolete policies, obsolete procedures, obsolete planning exercises, and we need to have periodic refreshes of those systems. Okay. Theft, we can have electronic or physical. So electronic, software or data. Physical, hardware, software or data. Okay. Physical, when tapes used to be a lot more popular, physical tapes were stolen all the time. Okay, or lost in transit. Right. It's a lot harder now to steal like server hardware from a data center because they're so secure. But it is very easy to steal your laptop out of your car if you leave it there. So if you work for a company, never leave anything in your car. You might look ridiculous walking into a date with your laptop in tow, okay? But at least it's secure. I have had bosses who have lost their laptop with critical company data on it. It is not a fun situation to be in. Okay? All right, IS management. So management is coordinating, administering, doing decision making, and allocating resources. Okay. Managers versus leaders. Leaders influence and lead by example. You can be a leader but not a manager. You can be a manager and not be a leader. Okay. I think we could all think of some examples of people who are managers but are certainly not leaders. Okay. Managers administer resources. As far as information security management goes, we want to do things like planning, writing policies, putting programs in place, ensuring that we have protection, that we have the right people, and we are doing project management. So information security planning, we do design, we create the plan, the information security plan, and then we implement it. Okay. And then oftentimes it's a cycle where we go back and we iterate, okay, over time. We can have different types of planning. So we have incident response. When there is an incident, how do we respond? What is our business continuity plan? How do we handle disasters? What are our policies? What type of personnel do we need in place? What technology are we going to use? What is our risk management plan? One of the activities you do in this class is risk management. And then lastly, a setup program, okay? Policies. So with policies, organizational guidelines that require a specific set of behaviors. Okay. So we might have an enterprise information security policy, issue specific security policies, and then system specific policies. Okay. For programs, we'll have a setup program and we might have a physical security program as examples. Okay. Not always exhaustive, by the way, when I have something in the slides. There might be other things. Protection, we have risk assessment and controls. We implement protection mechanisms, we implement technologies, and we use tools. Okay. The people, they're the critical link, so we'll have security personnel, security of our personnel, and then we'll have a setup program. And then lastly, the last topic for today is information security programs. They're ongoing. They're not like a regular project. The initial rollout is a project, but after the initial rollout, they're an ongoing process. Okay? And all the process that we engage as part of these programs, we do that on an ongoing basis. All right? So that's it for the chapter 1 material.